Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you again today. I'm happy to be back in Salt Lake City. No offense to Laramie, but I do like living in Salt Lake a little bit more. It was quite the trek this last weekend, driving 6 hours there, 6 hours back, and varying degrees of internet service and all that was super fun. So I'm happy to be back and get back to work. Obviously, the grind never stops. I learned that driving back on a Sunday is not super ideal when you have a million things that you have to still report. So that was fun to be able to break up that. But shout out to McDonald's Wi-Fi for helping me with some of these things. You never know what you're going to get, but Rock Springs McDonald's, there you go. We got some stuff done, so appreciate that. But happy to be back. I do apologize for last week's Monday episode. My audio, I did not bring my equipment with me on Monday and tried to do it in a different way, and it just didn't work out. So I appreciate you listening still and trying to suffer through the crappy audio that it was. So hopefully today is a little bit better. I do have my equipment with me today, and so we're going to do that. So today we're going to do a little updated look at the AP Top 25 rankings. We'll do a look ahead at the game schedule and a recap of the Wyoming game. But before we do that, let me tell you about our partners. Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready, hot, fresh, and fast. We've got your covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com. All right, let's jump into the episode. On Sunday, obviously, as every Sunday is, there is the updated Associated Press Top 25 rankings. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to it last week, I did an episode before previewing the Wyoming game where I basically went through the process of what it takes to rank teams. Having a unique vantage point from being the only voter from the state of Utah to do it. So if you want to go back and listen to that, that'll give you kind of an update or an idea of how I do my rankings. It's going to be different for everybody. Despite all the fallout from last week, there were still some interesting votes around the country. And, as I said last week, I appreciate feedback on my rankings, right? I'm not perfect in it. There really is no perfection to it, but at the same time, it's evaluating teams based on how they play, right? Like I don't fault anybody for necessarily having Notre Dame, for example, still in their ballot because they are a team that most likely would beat many of the top 25 teams. They just haven't had a great season to start. I did not put them in my top 25 simply because they're 0-2, right? And so there's rationale behind it. There's more than just 0-2, but each person's going to have their rankings and how they do it. I hope that they have a process for how they do it. Regardless, this is where we're at. So Utah checks in at number 16 this week. That's up 4 spots from where they were last week at number 20. So Utah's really in a prime position with where they need to be. This is kind of You're seeing Utah get a lot of respect for their non-conference schedule. And look, the reality is this non-conference schedule isn't world beater, right? Like this isn't a schedule where, you have all these top teams on there and they're going to be these great teams throughout the rest of the season. We're going to learn a lot about who these teams are and kind of where things shape up. You may have seen over the weekend that UCLA fired its head coach after starting 0-3 to the season. So you can already see that UCLA was kind of just beaten down. That game against Utah took a toll on them. You weren't ever really able to rebound back from that. Not that Utah was the only reason for that, but it doesn't help, right? You were optimistic going into the season that you were going to start out on a great note, and it just never went well, and then you go and lose to teams that you really had no business losing to, and so it's a tough situation, and that's the nature of it. A little side note with that, the UCLA firing, Virginia Tech also went through this as well. They both fired their coaches yesterday. And so what that does is that does open up a 30-day transfer portal window for these players. They're allowed to transfer right now, but there has been some confusion on that. Essentially, you can transfer and you can go join another program, in the next 30 days, but you can't play this season. So there is an NCAA rule where even if your head coach gets fired and you enter into the portal in that 30-day period, you can't play for a second team in the same competing season. So you could have somebody that transfers from UCLA to another program, but they are not allowed to play this year. So it would be more preserving redshirt seasons, doing different things that way. Obviously, all of those players can play at least one more game before making that decision while still preserving redshirt eligibility if they have that available to them. So, we'll see what happens. There's been a lot of decommitments on the recruiting front from UCLA, but that's not, that's what it is. And look, I'm not here to talk about UCLA, so we're going to bypass that. So as that point, Utah is ranked fairly high for this point in the season, and you still haven't really proved a ton from this team. I mean, obviously there's a lot of proof in kind of how they've been able to do things, but at the same time, there's still a lot that needs to be told about this team, right? And fortunately, this week we're going to find out a lot about this team and kind of who they can be. So, good landing spot for the Utes, up to 16, getting a lot of the respect that many think that they deserve. Some people have them ranked higher. I had them, I think, a couple places higher in mine, but it's right in that same vein of where they are at. I don't think any of these are a bad situation. So. Other Big 12 teams ranked, it's just two more teams. That's number 12, Iowa State. They really struggled this last weekend against Arkansas State. That was another situation where they had to go on the road to another venue in a G5 setting, and honestly almost lost that game. It was a 1-point game late, and they pulled away and found a way to win, but it didn't look like the Iowa State that we've seen in the first three games. You're bound to have that, right? Like, get it. Like, these G5 games don't always go well for teams. Maybe you're looking down on them. Maybe you're overlooking them. Whatever the case may be, sometimes it's all about matchups. And I think in that situation, Iowa State was just caught in a bad matchup, and it didn't work out. So, I think we've seen some flaws to Iowa State, but at the same time, they're still 4-0 on the season. And are the team that are getting the most votes from the Big 12, and I think it's deserving, right? I actually have them ranked lower on my AP ballot personally. I don't know how sustainable this is based on where they're at, but we'll see. Especially similarly, we've seen Kansas State not be as good, but you can have the same situation for Utah with UCLA. So at least Kansas State had a little bit more optimism to them. They've just bottomed out for whatever reason. And then the last team ranked in the top 25 is Texas Tech at 17. So that sets itself up for a number 16 versus number 17 this week. When the two teams play, obviously Big Noon kickoff is coming in the Big Noon Saturday window. So that's a 10 a.m. game. We went over this last week, but this is a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have the nation really watching. And, what that value is, it's tough to quantify, but at the same time, any good press for a university is a good thing, right? Especially for a university like Utah, which is always trying to kind of showcase itself to the world, especially in this world where you're trying to be included in the club. And that club being maybe the Power Two, whatever we want to describe that as, there's obviously another evolution to conference realignment coming up in the future. And you see Utah already trying to prepare for that. And so anytime you can be in a good spotlight, and especially if Utah can get a win on Saturday, that paints an even better picture. And so it's just more from a marketing perspective to help the university. And so, the fact that you have 2 top 25 ranked teams coming in, that you have the nation coming to Utah, that bodes well for the university, assuming that they can continue to put a good spotlight on the program. So, it should be a fun game. We'll get, I'm going to be talking to a beat writer later this week, and I'll release that previewing Texas Tech. So I'm not going to go too heavy into Texas Tech right now. I want to save a lot of that for then as we preview them. It'll be a fascinating game, and one that is going to have a lot of attention, but Utah's used to this type of situation. This isn't their first rodeo, right? I mean, you've had Michigan, you've had Florida, you've had USC, Oregon. You've had a lot of top teams come to Rice-Eccles Stadium and be featured. So, sometimes it doesn't work out, but I would say Utah is well-versed in this and understand what it takes. So beyond that, you do have other teams from the conference receiving votes. BYU still in that kind of perennial spot of 26, 27. This week they're back to 26 unofficially. And, still kind of lurking on whether they're going to receive a vote or receive a spot in the top 25, And then you have TCU, which is unofficially at 29, Arizona State at 30, and Baylor at 34. So still a lot of the teams that many were talking about at the beginning of the year in relation to being kind of Big 12 title contenders. I think right now it's probably a tiered system with those 3 teams being ranked as kind of that top tier, at least at this point, right? Like we won't know a ton until conference play starts. And then you have that second tier of the BYU, TCU, Arizona State, Baylor, which, they're clearly in contention for that. There's not really a ton separating them from those other 3, but it there may be some other weaknesses that haven't been addressed yet. So that's kind of where things lay with the AP Top 25. Once again, this is just a snapshot in time. I know people get really frustrated about having rankings this early in the season. It's a historical figure. It's a snapshot in time. And, as long as you keep winning, it bodes well for you. But at the end of the day, looking at these, when your team is ranked, you do get premier TV windows, right? That's not to say that you can not get those without being ranked, but there's just kind of a natural gravitation to saying your team is in the top 25. Networks believe it. Coaches believe it. They don't want to talk about it, but, there's something to it where they're going to look at that and say, hey, I have to respect this team, even if it means nothing. But there is some value to that. Also today, there was a game release for next week. So we got the game time for the West Virginia game. Utah will travel to Morgantown to play that game next Saturday. That game will kick off at 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time, 3:30 Eastern Time on Fox. So if you're keeping track, that'll be Utah's 3rd game on Fox this year. You obviously had the UCLA game that started late. You then played Cal Poly at ESPN, which was on ESPN Plus, and then last week CBS Sports Network. But this week is once again Fox, and the next week is Fox again. So you're getting a great opportunity to kind of showcase yourself to the nation. You're getting all kinds of different windows, so potentially hitting different audiences. Look, I'm not going to pretend and think that there's a lot of people out there tuning in and saying, oh, I got to tune in for this Utah team if you're not a fan. But at the same time, you're getting a lot of casual observers who are just looking in. That helps recruiting. That helps perception of the program. And so just getting all these different time windows is a great avenue for Utah, and that bodes well for a marketability thing like we talked about earlier. Just kind of one other note. We already know the Kansas game. This is the last game of the year. This is a Black Friday game. That game is also a 10 a.m. game here, locally 12 p.m. Eastern time. That game has a chance to also be on network TV at ABC or ESPN. If Utah's still winning, I have to imagine they would be on ABC, but it depends on the teams that are being played then. But I think, if Utah's still winning and Utah's in contention for the Big 12, that ABC slate seems pretty likely. So, you're getting a good opportunity here. We'll see how the rest of the season goes, but you're being featured on some great windows, and it bodes well for the Utes. So once again, a good opportunity. That game, we'll get into that, but I think that one's going to be a really interesting game. Depending on how this Texas Tech game goes, this could be a real tough situation as kind of a letdown game. Let's say Utah wins against Texas Tech. There's real potential where you've put so much energy and focus into that you go out there and kind of lay an egg because you kind of got over that hurdle and find yourself on the losing side in Morgantown, and that never bodes well. But we're going to see what this Utah team is made of, and you're going to get an opportunity to do that, and then Utah goes into its first bye of the season. So pretty good opportunity for Utah to be able to showcase its talent, assuming that they can do so, and have some fun doing it. So, all right, let's look at this Wyoming game. So, we're not going to debate why Utah was even in Laramie for the 900th time, but we are going to talk about this game. And Utah comes away winning 31-6. So if you're a bettor out there, you got your spread, assuming that you asked or you bet on Utah to cover that 23.5. If you got it then, some had it at 24, whatever it may be. They covered. So for all intents and purposes, Utah did exactly what they were supposed to do. You can view it however you want and whatever lens you want to. The reality is this game wasn't perfect, right? Everybody understands that. Depending on your viewpoint of this game, you may be looking at this very pessimistic. You may be looking at this as optimistic. I think it's somewhere in the middle, quite honestly. I think, as you're going into these situations where Wyoming is always a difficult place to play, and yes, some of that is the elevation. I think you saw some of that from the players. Not too much, right? I think it was Sharif Shah last week that said, you're going to fill it that first quarter, first quarter and a half, and then you're going to settle in. But because you've been training in elevation, it's not like it's the end of the world. You're going to figure it out. It just takes a little bit of time if that's where you're going to need. But, this is a team that was fine. So you had a great defensive performance all around, right? There was no question the defense did well, held Wyoming to just a touchdown. They missed the 2-point conversion. But at the same time, this is a team that the defensive performance was pretty solid. There's still things that they're going to look at and say, hey, we need to be better on. And I'm going to touch on some of that stuff in a little bit. But by and large, it was a solid performance. Once again, holds an opposing team to under 230 yards total. So that's 3 straight weeks. There's been a team, Utah's really landed on this perfect range where it's been 220 to 229 is where they've allowed teams. So it's been pretty consistent. Teams have been able to move the ball somewhat, but not enough to really make a difference. And Utah hasn't allowed a ton of points. And so this is another great performance from the defense, and like I said, I'm going to get into that shortly. But beyond that, it wasn't a clean game. There was 10 penalties for 98 yards, and you can argue with some of the penalties on the Mountain West crew and how they officiated it. You can look at PIs, you can look at holding calls, you can look at the pancake that was turned into a holding. There's a lot of different things where you can nitpick, right? And I think, there's still some things where even Devon Dampier said there was a little bias from the refs, and, you get what you get. But at the end of the day, Kyle Whittingham said that, they're not going to argue about what it is. You just kind of have to play that game and figure it out and fight through it. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine. Obviously, Utah didn't agree with all of those things, and they're probably going to be right on those if you were to go back and address it and grade it. But at the same time, if that's what they're calling, you have to play it that way, right? I think that's what so many people misunderstand, right? And this happens a lot more in basketball, where it may not be a foul, right? It may not be a foul, and it may not be something that 9 times out of 10 that a ref is going to call. But if they're calling it in that game and it's a consistent thing, you've got to learn how to adjust. And I think that's where Utah's at right now, is they've got to learn where these refs are playing this, right? You're going to get into this era now where you're a Big 12 refs, and there's going to be some things where they allow a little bit more physicality, they allow a little bit more leeway in some stuff, and so you kind of just have to play to what your refereeing crew is giving you, and it didn't work that well for Utah this week. It didn't work that well for them against Cal Poly. So this is 2 straight weeks where there's been high amount of penalties. At the end of the day, you've got to clean this up, right? I would say of all the things that happened in this game, I think this is the biggest mark that I think Kyle's going to harp on, simply because you've got to get that cleaned up. When you go play Texas Tech, when you go play BYU, go Arizona State, Baylor, if you're committing 10 penalties for 98 yards, that's a game changer, right? And Utah's found ways to be able to overcome that. But at the same time, you can't guarantee that, and you can't expect that to happen. You can't put yourself in 3rd and long and expect to convert every single time. If you do, that's great, but it's not a great position to be in. It's a better position just to not have those penalties, those things that don't matter, or that do matter, but that don't need to be involved. For example, there was a block in the back by Utah, which it's like you didn't even need that play. You didn't need that block. You pushed him in the back, and it didn't matter, and you erased an entirely long run to be able to negate some of that stuff. And so it's little things like that where some of it wasn't clean on Utah's end. Some of it was refs just kind of calling it in a different way than Utah is used to. On that same vein, Kyle Whittingham was a little frustrated, if you watched during the game, about not getting his defensive substitutions the way that he usually does. And look, he pushes the limit a little bit to this with subbing guys on and going slow and wearing down the clock and forcing teams to take timeouts. But there was none of that happening this week because the ref wasn't even standing over the ball and allowing a defensive substitution. That is supposed to happen. There hasn't been any rules changes. Even Kyle Whittingham was on the field wondering if something had happened that they just didn't know. That doesn't happen. The rules, but these refs weren't doing anything to allow that. And if the offense does sub out, the defense has the right to be able to sub on, and the ref essentially has to hold the ball and not let them snap until they've completely made their substitution. So, like I said, Kyle, obviously this is the game that he plays where he kind of exploits it to its fullest extent. But the refs weren't having any of it, despite it being the rule, and you had to live with it, right? It didn't cost Utah in the end because they were able to get their guys to jog off before it happened, or before they snapped the ball. But in the same vein, like it was different. So it's little things like that where you have to adjust to what the reffing crew is giving you. But at the same time, the crew was wrong. So it's tough, but you work through it and you kind of move on. So like I said, penalties are going to be where you have to really kind of hone in on. You can't have these types of things moving into Texas Tech, and I have to imagine that Utah's going to try to clean that up. Not always easy, but you're going to have to put a big emphasis on cleaning up and being a little bit more tight in that regard. So looking at this was a game of 2 halves, right? First half, just not much going on. They couldn't finish drives. I'm talking about the offense, obviously. The offense couldn't finish drives. To me, it seemed like they were a little rushed. Like they were trying to use their standard up-tempo play, but not in the kind of the same capacity, right? Like it seemed like they were still able to move the ball and they were doing what they need to, but there was some things where they just felt out of sync and out of rhythm, and you didn't really get kind of that consistency and fluidity that we saw in that first game of the season. This is the second week in a row where you kind of get some of that at times. I don't know if guys are pressing a little bit more, trying to make a big statement early. There was a couple play calls where I was a little confused on doing a design run with Devon Dampier on 3rd and long. But in the same vein, later on in the game, he's able to get those. So, you win and you lose some. Unfortunately for Utah, they had a ton of yardage and they could move the ball and they could get downfield. It wasn't perfect. Like anybody looking at that understands, like this was not a perfect offense. They could, like I said, move the ball, but once they got close to the red zone or inside the red zone, it didn't function as well for them. Like I said, it seemed rushed, just not in rhythm. And the real backbreaker there is that Dylan Curtis, the freshman place kicker, missed 3 field goals. And, that's tough, right? The first one went wide right. He overcorrects, and it hit the left upright. And so you've got that. And then their very last one was blocked. And so it's just a tough situation for Utah in that scenario. I would say by and large, you're not going to generally get that kind of performance, but you do have to be concerned about that, knowing that those situations could be impactful later. I still think Utah trusts Curtis. He's an upgrade to what Utah's had in a lot of respects. There was a bunch of touchbacks. There wasn't any kick returns. And so there's some, advantages of having him do it. It's just, he's young. You're trying to get it in there, trying to put it in these tough situations, and they're learning opportunities, right? And you'll get it. So then beyond that, you also had one punt that whole first half, really the whole game actually. You had one punt. So it's not like Utah was just, going 3 and out all the time and really struggling. It was one punt the entire game, right? Yeah, you were settling for field goals over touchdowns, and that was probably the bigger concern because you weren't able to finish drives. But at the same time, you were putting yourself in position to score. The big backbreaker there in the first half, though, was, Utah gets a recovered fumble and then marches its way down the field. Nate Johnson goes for, I think 13 yards on a run and fumbles the ball on the 3-yard line, and Utah loses the ball right there. So, the drive itself looked like probably the most complete and Utah-type drive that they wanted, and then it just ends in a turnover. Obviously, Nate Johnson, beside himself for that, really upset by it and frustrated. And during the game, there was a scenario where not a scenario, it did happen. Devon Dampier came up and was talking to Nate Johnson. And so I asked him after the game about it, and so I want to play a little clip. Man, I'm really struggling. Clip with what Devon said to Nate.
Yeah, Nate used to play quarterback, and I told him, quarterback is a very leadership position, and you've been in that situation before. Bad things happen all the time. I mean, it's football. It's not gonna always go your way. So just get in his head, tell him, get up. Don't show that to the crowd. Don't show that to our players. People are looking at you right now. You know what I mean? So carry yourself high, carry yourself with confidence. One play doesn't define you.
And I think that's a great kind of attitude from Dampier, right? Like, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. There's going to come a time where Dampier makes a mistake, and he actually did in the game, and we'll get to that in just a second. But, it's all in how you handle yourself, right? It's not being so aloof that you just kind of pass it over and not have some sort of remorse, but it's looking at it and saying, okay, I've got to be better, right? Like, these can be learning opportunities and helping. But I think that goes to show Dampier's leadership style. He's a guy that isn't afraid to go talk to anybody or help them and help them work through it amid when, Utah wasn't doing well themselves. And so it's just a great opportunity for Utah to face that adversity, quite honestly. I think in a different question, Dampier had said, he's happy that they're facing adversity early because then it allows them to be able to work through it and fight through it for games later on in the season. You don't really know what you have as a team until you face adversity, right? I would say that UCLA game, Utah really didn't face any adversity and just dominated, right? You got a little adversity against Cal Poly. You got more adversity against a Wyoming team that was selling out and really trying their hardest to be able to stop you, and you were able to learn a lot of lessons from that. Is it going to be the toughest test? No, 100%. Utah's going to have tougher challenges and maybe more adversity coming their way, but it was an opportunity to kind of start to see what this team is made of, right? And kind of how they're able to kind of come together and work. Part of the problem last year is the team didn't come together, right? There became much more fighting. There became much more finger pointing, and everybody was kind of trying to do things for themselves. Not that they weren't playing together as a team at times, but it just didn't have that same cohesiveness that this team does, where you can come together and say, hey, look, we made a mistake. The defense can come in there and they recognize that they were having a great performance, but they say, hey, we got you, right? Like, we're going to keep fighting for you and we're going to do this. But it's on the offense to say, hey, look, we're not just going to let this be a defensive performance. We're going to go out there and showcase ourselves as well. And so you did see that. In the second half, it was a completely different game. It's not that the numbers changed. Kyle Whittingham pointed this out today, where they essentially had the same numbers in terms of total yardage, rushing yards, passing yards, that kind of stuff. it was pretty equal between the two halves. The difference is Utah was finishing their drives. And so for not having any drives in the first half where you were able to get a touchdown outside of the one where you could have gotten one on the fumble, Utah finished the second half with 4 straight possessions, the only drives that they had in that second half, where each one was a touchdown. The second one I would say is probably the most impressive, and the reason I say that is because it ended up being a 19-play, 80-yard drive over 7 minutes. And, Utah did this against UCLA where they went 20 plays. It was much more methodical and clean, and allowed Utah to really just kind of hone in on what they did best. This one was chaotic in all respects, right? And Utah's holding on to a 10-0 lead. It felt comfortable. It's not like Utah was ever really in doubt, but there was always that feeling that if the right things went Wyoming's way, this game could turn fast. And so this drive specifically probably meant more than that first drive in the second half where they got the touchdown. That first one, you needed that. But I would say this one meant more to the actual gameplay in terms of stopping Wyoming, right? And so in this drive, there's a ton of problems. There's holding penalties after holding penalties. There's different things that are going on to push Utah back. Essentially, the biggest moment here is you get to a 3rd and 21, and honestly, it didn't look good, right? Like Utah's been in these situations before in years past where 3rd and 21 is a backbreaker. You're just not going to convert it. You're not going to do it. You're not really going to be effective in that situation because it just didn't happen, right? And, it is what it is, right? Like Utah's been in some of these situations already this year where you've been backed up a little bit and they've been able to prove well in their 3rd down conversions. But the way that the game was playing itself out, it just didn't have that feel where this was going to be one of those, even though Utah came out in the second half doing much better. But Utah, Dampier finds Devon Bentley down the sideline. He gets 23 yards. He bulldozes his way to the first down marker. He caught the pass, I think, at 21 yards, so he was fine, but bulldozes himself to an extra 2 yards and gets the first down, and Utah moves on. The drive ends when Dampier fumbles the ball as he's looking to pass somewhere, quickly picks it up, scans the field, and finds Larry Simmons in the front corner of the end zone with a toe-tapping touchdown, and all is well. But, it was a remarkable play to be able to find Simmons and be able to do that, but I would say similarly equal to that is that 3rd and 21 play. I think both of those things, I don't want to call him luck because I think that's who Devon Dampier is, and you're starting to see that especially from Devon Bentley emerging as a tight end that has been consistent. But you're seeing, even within that own drive, a bunch of adversity, right? Like Utah finding ways to fight through that and then get the touchdown. Dampier said after the game, he's like, look, I trust my offensive line enough to know that I don't have to jump on the ball in that scenario, that I can quickly pick it up and still have an opportunity to make a play. And kudos to that offensive line because they did, right? They gave Dampier all the time in the world to be able to have what he needed to be able to be in that situation. He didn't have to pick it up and quickly run. He was able to scan the field and see that he had an open receiver, and he struck with a perfect pass that only Simmons could get, and Simmons made the play look even better with his toe-tapping grab to be able to get the touchdown. From then on out, it was all Utah, right? Like this was Utah's game. They had the full confidence, and everything was won. The last drive of the game was essentially not putting it in Devon Dampier's hands, but at the same time keeping him on the field so you don't have to burn a quarterback for redshirt games. And, you even had Devon Dampier flex out wide a couple times. You had Hunter Andrews pretty much in the Wildcat every single time. And Utah marched their way down for 75 yards, and Hunter Andrews finishes it with a rushing touchdown. So, that touchdown actually meant a ton to a lot of people who are considering that game. They had a little money on that game. So kind of fun to be able to see how it goes. But it really kind of shows the difference with this team, that they haven't really been stalled by other teams yet. That's not to say that they haven't been stopped, but they haven't really done anything to be able to be stopped by other teams. It's more Utah beating itself. And that was really kind of the takeaway from that first half, is Utah was beating itself. They were moving the ball with ease. Maybe not ease. That's probably not the best way to put it. They weren't necessarily struggling, but it wasn't like everything was great. But in the same vein, they were doing what they needed to. They just couldn't finish at times. There were some plays, like I said, where Dampier was called on to have a designed run. They ran him a few times, and sometimes you get those, but it just didn't work out. There's a few passes that were incomplete. Different things like that, one catch or one first down and suddenly things change. But it is what it is. I think if you're looking at this game in totality, you're not going to be super impressed with the game, but at the same time, I think there was a lot to still glean from of how impressive this offense can be and what Utah can do. I mean, they put up over 570 yards of offense, 311 rushing yards. I mean, this was a total domination performance, and so it was 517, not 70. Sorry. 517 total yards. But it was just a total domination in terms of kind of what, maybe it was 570. I'm getting my stats mixed up. I have some other things here where I'll talk about that, but either way, over 500 yards, and Utah did well. So I understand if you're frustrated by that game, but at the same time, I don't think it's as bad as it really needed to be. I think there's still things that Utah's holding back on. They're still doing things that is setting up for what this season can be, and really fascinated to see how it goes. So really quick, looking at some of the stats and kind of where Utah's been. So coming into the game, Utah's third down conversion was incredibly high, one of the best in the countries. They were converting at a high rate on third down, and finishes the game just 9 of 15. Still not a bad number, but at the same time, it started out as 4 of 10 at halftime. Just weren't converting on third downs, and that's really where the game changed for Utah in that first half. Like I said, they weren't finishing drives, but it really came down to those third downs. But the point being is you've got to get more on those first and second downs, right? They've done well to get there, but they're still finding times where, that they need to be able to get a little bit more. And then those third downs, sometimes third and long aren't as difficult. They're a little bit more manageable. But Utah's finding a way to convert. That second half, they went 5 of 5 on third down, so it wasn't a bad situation at all. It was a great opportunity for Utah, and, you still learned a lot about what you were. As I mentioned, 311 rushing yards against Wyoming, really solid performance. This is between 6 players. I think that's the most impressive thing here is between multiple people. It's not just, Devon Dampier rushing for all the yards. It's not Wayshawn Parker running for all the yards. It's a bunch of different guys doing different things, and if anything, that limits the amount of carries that these guys get, meaning it limits the production, not production, but the wear and tear on the body that these guys have to take all year. The fact that you can get to this point where you had 311 yards and you were able to distribute that equally to a lot of the players means great things for Utah, where you're not losing a lot of production. You're not losing, the issues where you're trying to run a running back out there 30 times. This is a great situation for Utah to be in. So Devon Dampier leads the team with 86 yards on 13 carries, only 13. I know it seems like a lot, and there's still times where I think people get worried with it, but he's averaging 6.6 yards per carry, right? Like he's doing a ton with the ball, and they're going to continue to put the ball in his hands. Wayshawn Parker finishes with 80 yards on 10 carries. He only actually had 2 carries at halftime, and so he really kind of started to come alive in the second half. Hunter Andrews finishes with 62 and 6 carries. He also gets a touchdown. Like I said, he was playing in the Wildcat for much of that last drive. Nakari Rogers, 60 yards, 13 carries and 1 touchdown. Nate Johnson, 16 yards, 1 carry. Snowden, only 7 yards and 2 carries. They limited him a little bit more. I think you see where they continue to go with him, but if they don't need to do him, they're not necessarily just going to keep him out there to keep him out there. So good opportunities for Utah. There's going to continue to be more of that. I still think you're going to find a bunch of guys working there. Dampier is still going to be a central figure to that run game, but you've got at the very minimum Wayshawn Parker and Nakari Rogers doing things. Hunter Andrews is really emerging. JJ Buchanan is starting to get in there, though he's still much more of a pass catcher. You're getting a whole bunch of other guys factoring into that, and I think that means well. So real quick, a season update, just kind of looking at these things. Utah is 13th in the country in scoring offense. They're averaging 45.7 points per game. Those numbers are going to drop for everybody, right? Like, we get it. non-conference games, especially when you have FCS games factored into there, those numbers are going to change. But I think you're seeing a team that obviously clearly has a much improved offense, and it's showing up on the stat sheet. Also, total yards, Utah has put up an average of 517. That's where the 517 came from. That's 15th in the country. So for a team that was near the bottom last year, Jason Beck is once again doing his magic and putting Utah at near the top of the country. There's still a lot to go. Like I said, once you start getting into conference play, these numbers will shift. But so far, so good. For the year, they've already had a 1,500 yards, 1,551 to be exact. They're on pace to get 6,204 yards. Last year, for an example, Utah just barely under 4,000 total yards for the year. So clearly a big difference in what they're doing. They're putting up about 500 yards per game. That, like I said, is pretty impressive. Just as kind of another reference point there, in 2022, so the second year that Utah won a Pac-12 championship, they put up 6,500 yards, but that also included yardage from the championship game and the bowl game. So Utah is doing really well. They're on pace to be able to beat that kind of performance, assuming that they stay on this pace. That's going to drop, but doing well. Rushing yards, they're averaging 290 yards per game, which is 7th in the country. Their total for the season is 870 yards and on pace for 3,480. Once again, last year, 1,565. That was what the total yardage was, and Mekhi Bernard accounted for 1,000 of that. So Utah is almost to its last year's production in terms of rushing yards in just 3 games, which is, if that doesn't scream some of the biggest issues that Utah had last year, then I don't know what to tell you. That was a big issue. In 2022, once again, this includes championship and bowl game, 3,047 rushing yards. So Utah's well on its way to doing well this year. Those numbers aren't going to stay up for the entire year, but as long as you continue to have the production that you need to be able to do well, it's going to be great. So, for example, Utah right now is averaging 6.5 yards per play. Last year, they were just at 5.2. In 2022, they were at 6.5. So right there on that mark. Even if you're not producing the same numbers like 500 yards per game, if you're able to at least average that 6.5 per play, that Utah's going to be in a good spot. So there's that. All right, let me pause real quick to tell you about our sponsors, Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, before we close out this episode, I just want to hit on a few topics, and the first one is on Devon Dampier. We're 3 games in. There was a lot made about kind of who he can be. Can he do this at this level? And we still haven't fully gotten that picture because he hasn't played anybody outside of UCLA, and UCLA, clearly isn't up to snuff. I will argue that UCLA is going to give their best performance in that first game of the year. That still doesn't mean that it's anything to value, but at the same time, you're seeing Dampier, who came in with a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, 12-12 was what it was, and a lot of people criticizing kind of that number, that he was just going to be more of turnover prone and all that, and also his completion percentage just wasn't that high. Through 3 games, and obviously it's just 3 games, and it's against competition that's going to be different than what he's going to face in the next 9 games. He's 65 of 89, which is 73% on the year for 628 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He's also rushed for 198 yards, leads the team by 6 yards by the way, on 33 attempts, and he has 1 rushing touchdown. He's averaging 6 yards per carry. So really solid numbers. This is a guy that's been able to do really well. Obviously, 0 interceptions is impressive. You can see in his game how he's been much more methodical, but also careful in kind of how he's getting in there. You're seeing a little bit more of a development from him and how he's processing the field. Sometimes that has bitten Utah in the sense that they haven't been able to get those big explosive plays that Kyle Whittingham's looking for, but he's limiting his potential for turnover-worthy plays. And I think that in and of itself is impressive. The reality is Dampier's going to throw an interception one of these days, right? It could happen this Saturday. Like, it's very rare. Actually, I don't even know when the last time this happened, but it's rare that a starting quarterback at a Power 4 program did not throw at least one interception. I mean, if you're DJ Lagway at Florida, you threw 5 just this week. So I don't think that's going to happen. But there's going to come a time where he throws his first interception, and it's all in how he handles it after that, right? There's still a lot about his game that we don't know, but I think we know enough to kind of showcase who he is. There's obviously guys in the national media that are hyping him up as a potential Heisman candidate. We're way too early for that kind of stuff, but you're at least getting in that conversation where people can look at you and say, hey, this Devon Dampier kid is really solid, and if he continues to have this same success, there's no reason he shouldn't at least be in that conversation. Whether he's there or not remains to be seen. Obviously, if Utah's putting up this similar numbers against Big 12 competition, yeah, he's probably in that conversation. But at the same time, it's learning kind of where he can be. But by every account, he has lived up to what Utah's wanted, and it's been a big game changer for this Utah team, who really just you needed just something decent, and you've been able to have something so much more than that. Obviously, having the dual threat capabilities helps. But just having Dampier come in, understands Beck's offense, understands what he needs to do, just has great instincts. He's a leader on the field. It shows a lot for what Utah has right here. And Kyle Whittingham, who, he's obviously going to grade his quarterbacks high if they're performing and getting touchdowns. But I think even to that level, Dampier is on par, if not exceeding what Kyle Whittingham has wanted. And so today he graded him as an A+. Like, I don't know what that means for the rest of the season for Dampier, if he can maintain at this level, but you're seeing a guy that has completely lived up to the expectations that Utah's had for them. And now it's just a matter of finishing strong and being able to do it. But here's Kyle talking about kind of what Devon brings to the team and kind of assessing him 3 games into the season.
Now, 3 games into the season, how would you grade where Devon is right now, and where does he need to go to kind of reach that depth that you guys really?
Well, I give him an A+. I mean, not only is what he's doing on the field, but his leadership, his impact on the team overall. He's just been exactly what we hoped he would be, and he's without question one of our team leaders, and the players have embraced him. And so I think that we couldn't have asked any more from him to this point. He's completing the ball at a high rate. He's protecting the football. He's our leading rusher right now. So he's doing it all, and we just got to keep being intelligent with how we use him. But he runs the ball so effectively, and there's quarterbacks in the country that do run the ball effectively, and schools let him run. I mean, you can't just take that away from him. That's such a huge part of his game. And so, but you can hope that he'll stay out of harm's way as much as possible. There's some times where you can't do that, but I think at this point, like I said, couldn't have been any better than what he's done, and his numbers really speak to that.
And I think that's the biggest point there is you can't take away his game, right? Like, I know a lot of people are really worried about his running. I think most of the runs that he's done haven't really been in a situation where he's going to put himself in harm's way. Now, there's some of those where he's running up the gap and trying to get third downs. There's always a chance that can be a risk. But I think you're seeing a guy that just has true potential, and they're going to lean into that, right? You're going to still have to have Devon Dampier running the ball. But I think beyond that, you're seeing a guy who, despite, maybe, some of the traits that people think aren't going to work in his favor, he's been able to do what he needs to, right? Does he have the best arm in terms of being able to just chuck it downfield and be able to get a guy 50, 60 yards downfield? No. He's a little limited in that respect, but you've seen enough in his passing capabilities where he can get it exactly where he needs to, right? There's a few plays this last week. You could point to the Dallin Bentley one. You could point to, obviously, that Larry Simmons one. There's even the Dallin Bentley one against Cal Poly where he hits the front corner of the end zone. But you saw one this last week against J.J. Buchanan where he just put it right up where he could get it, and he was able to get the ball over the defender and do exactly what he needed to. There were times where they tried that a couple times in the game, down the sidelines with Buchanan to try to get him involved, and there wasn't a complete connection. So it's not like everything is perfect, and obviously the defensive players are going to have their say in this as well. But you've got a guy that, when he needs to pass, he's been pretty effective and efficient with it. There hasn't been a ton of mistakes. There's still some of that where you want to see when Utah really needs him to make a pass, can he do it? And we've seen that, right? Like that 3rd and 21 is an example of where they needed it. But I think when games are tighter, when the pressure is on, and when you do it, can he hit those tight windows where he can force it a little bit, where you can see his true playmaking abilities? But I think right now, you have to be very optimistic about what Devon Dampier means to the program and what he's doing for the program. Look, injuries can happen anywhere, right? Like we get that, right? And it's real easy to kind of have everything come to a screeching halt when injuries happen. But I think as of right now, Utah's doing really well. And if they can continue to get that kind of production out of him, Utah's going to be in a good position in the Big 12. I don't know that there's a team out there that necessarily has all the right tools that can just completely stop him on their own, right? Like I just think mobile quarterbacks in and of themselves are just a tricky matchup for any team in the country. And so, that they can lean into that advantage. I think you saw, especially when teams can load the box and they're going to try to force you to pass, he's been able to do it, right? And some of this is Utah designing it, with this screen pass or these shorter passes to be able to help him. But I think it all goes into it, right? Like when you've got a guy that can be effective in those quick passes and the short passes, where he can be effective in the middle of the field, where he can be effective a little bit more downfield, which we still haven't fully seen his true capabilities there. It's tough because now you've got to respect all levels of the game, especially when he can run. There's going to be design plays where he can get out there. There's going to be plays where the play is just completely broken down and he has to use his own feet and get what he needs to, and that's the challenge. And I think part of that is we've seen a lot from him in these first 3 games, but I don't know that we've fully seen his true potential. I think Jason Beck has, I don't want to call it fully vanilla. I mean, Utah's put some stuff out there, but I think you've seen a lot of different things. They're setting up for a lot more coming this season. You're going to see that potentially this week, and you're going to see some of this shift as the season goes. And I think that's what makes this offense so great, is that they can shift to some of those things. Things that aren't working right now may work later. Some things that are working right now may not work later. But it seems like they've got enough players around them that they can be malleable, right? Like they can move around and they can do different things, where if they're taking away, those short passes, maybe they can hit the tight ends more. Maybe they can find different ways to get their run game to develop. Like there's a lot of different things that this offense can do. And that leads me into kind of another point where Jason Beck is seemingly creating this positionless player in football. We hear about that a lot in basketball, where you've got a guy that can kind of go 1 through 5, and with teams going a lot more small ball and trying to use guys in different areas of the court, this is kind of that next evolution inside college football, where Beck is trying to take players. I mean, we've seen that with 3 defensive players, but you're seeing guys that may not fit a prototypical position, or maybe that prototypical player or that player in that prototypical spot may not be doing the same types of things. And so it's creating this challenge for opposing defenses who don't really know how to scheme it up, right? A lot of these times, and look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on this, but when these opposing teams are scouting the game, most of the time they're just looking at the numbers, right? They're not looking at the name. They couldn't care less about the name. You don't have any guarantees outside of numbers. And so when you have this, you say, okay, player 22, he lines up right here, and this is what he does, that kinds of things. In this system, you don't have that guarantee, because player 22, which obviously Utah doesn't have player 22, that's retired, and we get why, but we're going to use that number. Player 22 does this. No, he has a multitude of things that he can do, and then it just creates, an off-balance situation where the linebacker now has to factor, okay, I've got to usually do this, but also I have to do this. The defensive end has to factor into different things. Like, there's a lot of different things where these players, it can create a challenge for the defense. And so I asked Kyle about that today, and just kind of what this means to Utah.
In Jason's offense, it seems like there's been a lot more positionless players, guys that can kind of fill different roles. Do you see that as an evolution in the sport, or is that more of just kind of a wrinkle? And what advantage does that provide having that in the system?
Well, that's a good question, and you're very observant because that's exactly what he does. And what it does is puts D coordinators in a situation where how do we treat this guy? Is he a wideout? Is he a running back? Is he a tight end? You know, what exactly is the matchup going to be? And that in particular is a challenge for teams that have sub packages, you know, that sub in and out with your different groups. Some defenses will play the same 11 no matter what you put out there, and it's not as big a deal to those guys. But those matchup defenses, it certainly causes problems, and how to identify the guy and how to categorize the guy. And you're right, he has and I've said it before, Jason has a really good feel for getting the most out of his guys and putting them in positions where they can do the things they do best instead of asking a guy to do something that maybe is not his cup of tea. He does a great job of finding their role and maximizing that role.
I think that's exactly the kind of point where when you talk about an offensive coordinator and he says, you know, I try to put my players in the best position for them, or I play my offense to them. You know, we've heard that. We even heard that with Andy Ludwig, where he's going to scheme the plays to his best players. And I'm not saying that wasn't the case, right? Clearly for Utah, their best player was Cam Rising. And so they were scheming towards his skill set and what he was able to do. But at the same time, you were still kind of fitting guys into a position that they didn't fully feel comfortable with, especially with kind of the Bible of a playbook that Andy Ludwig had. And so it created this challenge that just didn't really suit Utah. Jason Beck is completely changing kind of how that is. And look, I'm not saying that Beck is like some revolutionary offensive play caller, right? Like, this isn't revolutionary in its own right. But at the same time, if you can create players, or not create players, but create situations for players where they don't have a set position, it completely changes the game. And it may be subtle, but at the same time, if you're able to do it in a way that really puts opposing teams in a tough situation, it creates all the advantages in the world for the offense. Nothing hurts a defense more than if they have to think. And if you've got guys that can't just react and they can't understand what they need to do in their assignment, like for example, like Kyle said, if they don't know the category of where to put that guy, how do you line up? How do you see this? I'm supposed to line up when there's a fullback right here, but now that fullback also is, is able to do this and suddenly becomes a wide receiver or whatever that, I'm just throwing things out there. It changes kind of the makeup, and so it puts players in an uncomfortable position on the defense. Oh, and then you factor in that you have Devon Dampier back there, and that he's able to just absolutely wreak havoc on teams because you have to respect him. And so it's not like teams can't scheme towards this, right? It's not like they can't say, okay, here's kind of his tendencies. And the longer the season goes, there's going to be more tape on that. It's going to be much harder for Jason Beck to really utilize the positionless player. But you see a willingness to be able to just kind of find guys and help them with whatever they need to do. For example, you have Smith, Snowden, Lander, Barton, Jackson Benny that have come over from the defensive side. We still haven't seen fully all their capabilities, especially Jackson Benny, who Kyle Whittingham keeps pointing to as having, needing to be one of the big playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. You have Hunter Andrews, whose role continues to develop, who, if he can be utilized in that wildcat position, what does that mean, right? Where's going to be the time where he decides to throw it out to Devon Dampier or somebody else as they're able to utilize that? You've got J.J. Buchanan who can do different things. You've got Nate Johnson who can do different things, though his role has been much more limited than others. You've even got Semitel Longa, who was a defensive lineman, who they've brought over onto the offensive side of the ball to play as kind of a fullback position. What's going to happen when suddenly he gets the rock, and you have to account for that. Like, there's going to be a lot of different things with this offense where they're just trying to find anybody, and it's something unique to this season where we haven't really seen that in the Kyle Whittingham tenure, where the knock was always you take your skilled players on offense and you move them to the defensive side of the ball and they become these stars. We're starting to see a little bit more of a flip on that, where You're taking some of these defensive players, you're taking some of the offensive players, you're doing whatever you can to find the stars of the team, no matter which side of the ball that they line up on, and put them in a position where they can succeed. Are they a true tight end? No. Are they a true wide receiver? No. Are they a true, running back? No. You're seeing a lot of those types of things. For example, J.J. Buchanan came into the season as a wide receiver, and they quickly moved him to tight end. But they've kind of flexed him back out a little bit and have been using him more as a wide receiver. But it's still kind of these hybrid roles where they're finding ways to utilize his strengths in different ways, right? And so I think that's what makes this offense so effective for Utah, is they're finding these new wrinkles that just make the defense think. And if you can get the defense to think, it's much easier for you to execute. Oh, and by the way, as I said, you have Devon Dampier. And another aside, you have this effective offensive line who is able to move guys out of the way. You've got 2 tackles who are still getting the first-round grade projections. They've performed incredibly well in what they're able to do, and you have to account for all of that. It's still not going to be perfect, right? There's still going to be things that's going to go on. There's going to be defenses that figure it out much better than others. But if you can continue to find these different wrinkles that allow you to be effective, it's going to mean all the world for this Utah team. And so we'll see what it looks like this week against Texas Tech. I'm really fascinated to kind of see this offense go against a defense that is, it hasn't fully been tested. Texas Tech hasn't fully been tested. Their strength of schedule to this point has been pretty low. A lot of people want to knock Utah's strength of schedule this early, but it's like if there's a way to double it, that's kind of what Texas Tech has faced this year. So we still don't fully know, but at the same time, there's going to be some challenges, right? And so I'm really curious to see now that Utah steps into this new evolution of the Big 12 with this offense, what it means, right? What it's going to mean for Jason Beck. How is he going to scheme it? This all works against Mountain West type teams, but can it work now against Big 12 teams? It obviously worked against a Big 10 team in UCLA, and they have their own problems. He's done this at Syracuse. He's had opportunities to do this, so it's not like this is an unproven concept. But I think he's finally got some players with some skill sets that he's never really had anywhere before, and we're starting to see him and kind of his mind and how he operates, and so I'm curious to see there. Last thing I want to touch on is the defense. You've got 2 guys, especially in John Henry Daly and Jackson Benny, who have really meant a ton to the team. John Henry Daly, I wrote an article earlier this year, I think it was in fall camp, where I said, is Sack Lake City dead? There really hasn't been this big name that's been able to produce at a high level the last few years, and yet John Henry Daly has become that guy this year. He's got a great motor. He's a guy that's been able to be incredibly effective in the backfield. He's getting the takeaways that they need to, meaning sacks. If I remember right, he had a forced fumble this last week as well. He's done incredibly well, and he's meant a ton to this team, especially knowing that you've kind of limited Logan Fano, right? Like, you've been able to be that effective while still limiting what was perceived to be one of your best players coming into the season. Not to say Logan still can't be that guy, but if you can do that with John Henry Daly, you're going to be in a great situation. So right now he has 5 sacks through 3 games. That leads the country. He's tied with a couple players, but that leads the country. That means a ton for this team, knowing that last year I think they only had 23 sacks combined. This team already has done a phenomenal job of being able to get in the backfield, being able to put some pressure. Can there be more? 100%. I think, Kyle kind of addressed it a little bit today, where they still don't feel like they are where they need to be. But at the same time, you've got guys like John Henry Daly, who have done a great job and have been able to be a force for Utah. Outside of that, you have Jackson Benny, who is still learning, right? Like, I'm curious to see how he plays in these next few games. Is he able to have those same abilities? But I mean, he got another almost pick 6 opportunity this week against Wyoming, where he was able to almost get to the touchdown. He's got great eyes, but at the same time, he hasn't fully developed that yet too, and we're going to see there. But he's meant a ton to this defense. He's been a great asset there, where they haven't had to utilize Smith Snowden in the nickel a ton. They've been able to flex him outside in the corner. And when you have a game like this week, where you're going to have some pretty dominant wide receivers, you're going to need Smith to play on the outside, and you're going to need Jackson Benny to kind of fill that role up in the middle, against some of those bigger guys. So it's been a great opportunity for those two guys to kind of really showcase themselves to the world. But there's still so much more on this defense that they could do, right? Like the secondary hasn't been perfect. And if anything, it's more based off tackling. It's more kind of having that communication. There's still some times where guys are getting beat or they're not in the right spot. You do have a major loss in the backfield with Rabbit Evans, who suffered a season-ending injury on Saturday. The guy he was already dealing with his own injuries this year. They tried to get him on the field for just a few snaps to kind of get him ready for the Texas Tech game as one of the guys that they expected to be kind of their top safeties. There was a lot of conversation coming into the season about him and kind of the development that he'd made. And suddenly, 6 plays in, he's out for the season. So really tough break for him. Utah is really looking to have him really shore up kind of their defensive performance in the secondary, really allows Teo Johnson to kind of move around and do what he needs to. But they're going to have to continue to go with Nate Ritchie, and Kyle Whittingham wasn't shy about where he needs to be, right? They like that he's in the right position. He just hasn't had great tackling, and he hasn't been as effective there. So it's really just kind of unlocking his potential there. But they feel confident in what they've got. It's just, things change and injuries happen, and you never know where they're going to happen or what it's going to mean. But it seems like, there's still room for this defense to grow. But they've done well, right? Like we're nitpicking at a lot of these things on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, but I think some of them can kind of foretell what's going to take place for the rest of the season. And if you don't get some of those things fixed, Utah could be in a world of hurt, especially this Saturday where you're going to go up against, the most competent receivers that you faced this year, that you may face all year, quite honestly. And, we'll see how well they can manage that. So, really, really fascinated to kind of see the defense and kind of its evolution for this season as well. I think, one of the biggest knocks on the year was the defensive line and kind of where they were going to get the pressure and who was going to be there. We expected Dallas Vakalahi to be a major factor in there, and he got injured and hasn't been able to play, and yet Utah's still been able to be really effective there. Once again, it's not the competition that you're going to face in the Big 12, but I think the fact that you don't even notice them and the fact that you've been able to limit the run game and everything that regard kind of shows that they're doing their job. If you're not thinking about trench play, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff, it generally means that they're doing their job. And I think by and large, Utah's doing its job. So really, really great opportunity for Utah this week. It's going to be, a fun game. Like I said, we'll preview this later in the week and kind of talk about what this Texas Tech game means. There's a lot of Texas Tech fans that feel very confident about this Saturday, and they might be right. We'll find out, but I think we don't really know anything about either one of these teams, and I'm looking forward to see it. So with that, we'll sign off, and we'll come back again later this week to talk about Texas Tech. But I hope you're having fun. It's much better than last year, trying to watch 3 and outs every single time, and wondering if Utah can do anything with the ball. Now it's finding little nitpicky things at the moment and trying to see how Utah can get better. So with that, we'll sign out today, and hope you have a great week.